Hi, my name is Ian Korn from Troop 15, Tallinn, Connecticut, and today I'll be covering knife, axe, and saw safety and other requirements for the township. So to start off with safety, a couple things we want to cover are the few basic points you should always keep in mind when using the axe, saw, and knife. So the first thing is the axe yard, which you can see around me is a roped off area where people know the tools will be used and to stay out of without the person who's running the axe yard's permission. Another important note to keep in mind when using tools is attire. So a really important part of your attire you should always have on when using these tools is good boots and closed-toed shoes. Like, boots are always a good idea because they protect your feet more than sneakers or open-toed shoes. Another important piece of attire to wear and use when using an axe yard is safety glasses and leather work gloves because those will protect your hands and eyes better than anything else. And another really important part of running an axe yard is to always know where the local troop first aid kit is. For instance, for me, it is right behind me right there. So we will always know where to go in case someone does get hurt in the axe yard. So for pocket knives, which is the first tool we will cover, they have a couple specific uses, and it's always good to know when to use each tool. So for pocket knives, the main uses are to whittle wood, cut rope, open cans, or possibly even slicing food. So now let's get into how to use a pocket knife safely. The first thing you want to do is make sure the area around you is clear and safe to use the knife in. And the way you do that is by taking the knife, holding it out in front of you while it's closed, and making a full circle around you to make sure no one is in there and no one can get hurt while using it. So the next thing to keep in mind is when using a knife in any means, anytime, is to always keep it pointed away from yourself and to always cut away from yourself. So now that I have my circle cleared and the knife is pointed away from me, we can get into whittling. So this is a stick I like to whittle with, and something that is important to use when whittling with knives especially is to make sure your knife is sharp. When a knife is sharp, it will cut smoothly, like this, and this, making nice, smooth, long, clean gashes in the wood, instead of something a dull knife would make. A dull knife would not make clean marks like this knife did, and would require you to push and push and push until eventually it slips, and you could eventually hurt yourself or someone else. And one last thing to keep in mind about a knife is you should never throw in any circumstances. That's unacceptable and is a great danger to everyone. The last part of pocket knife use is the care. So the first thing you want to do when caring for a pocket knife is take a toothpick and put a piece of cloth over it to clean in the knife. So in all knives there's a gap and debris and other sorts of materials can get stuck in there. So using that toothpick or the cloth, you can clean out between there and get all the stuff out and make sure your knife is brand new. And to wash the knife, you want to use warm, soapy water as that follows the knife's manufacturer guidelines and keeps the knife in the best condition possible. Next is sharpening. So there are several ways to sharpen a knife, and I have two with me right now. The first way is with a whetstone. A whetstone is something that looks like this and has two sides, one coarse and one fine. And one of the sides takes a dull knife to relatively sharp, and then the other side takes a relatively sharp knife to very sharp. You want to make sure when sharpening a knife you use both sides to get the sharpest way possible. And the way you do that is either with some whetstones, you need water or oil to put on the stone, and with some whetstones, it takes nothing and can be used dry. And after you do that, apply the liquid you might need. You will take the knife at about a 20-degree angle, hold it down, and move across the whetstone like this, which sharpens the knife and gets it in a really good condition. The next method I have is this sharpener right here, with a coarse side and a fine side like the whetstone. And the way you use this sharpener is to hold it, put a knife in between, and just move it back. This sharpens the knife the same as that. It doesn't matter which one you use, it is just a preference. Let's move on to saws. Like any tools, saws have their specific uses, and for saws that will be cutting wood widthwise, to be cutting firewood into shorter strips, and maybe cutting branches from trails. Next, we'll talk about the safety rules you should always follow when using a saw. Since saws are delicate tools, they should always have a sheath on them which protects the user and the blade from damage. Like any tools, saws should also be carried in a specific way. As you see how I'm holding this saw, I'm holding it facing behind me and by the handle, even if it has a sheath on it, which you should always do. You should make sure that the tool is facing behind you, so if you happen to drop it or slip, there's less chance of you or the saw being damaged. Now, let's move into the usage of a saw. The first thing you want to keep in mind when using a saw is to make sure it's propped up on a log, because whatever you're sawing, you need to make sure you don't accidentally saw through it and go right into the dirt, which hurts the blade. And the next thing to keep in mind is the sawing motion that you're making. When making that motion, you want to make sure the blade is angled downwards and are using long strokes, using all the teeth on the blade. You also want to make sure that when using the saw, you're pushing instead of pulling too hard. You want to make sure that most of your force is behind the push, as that what saws the best. Now let's talk about how you can best care for a saw. So the first thing that you can do is always keep the sheath on the saw when it's not in use. That not only protects the blade from foreign materials, but it also protects people around the saw. And even if you always do have the sheath on the saw when not in use, the blade will still get dull from when it is used. And unlike other tools like axes or pocket knives, you can't really sharpen a saw blade. So the best thing you can do is replace a dull blade with a new sharp one. And then finally, like all other tools, a saw should be stored under shelter to make sure it stays safe from the elements. The last tool that we're going to be covering is the axe. And like the other tools before, they have specific situations and when their use comes in handy. Those situations could be splitting wood, cutting wood lengthwise, and limbing or bucking. In general, the axe can be a bit more dangerous than some of the other tools we've covered, so it's really important to keep these safety tips in mind. The first thing is the sheathing. You want to make sure that the axe stays sheathed unless you're about to use it. And when using an axe, you always want to make sure that it's in good condition. You want to check the handle and the head to make sure that it's tight and there's no splintering in the wood, because an axe in bad shape should never be used. And when carrying an axe, you always want to make sure you carry by the handle with the head facing down, with the blade pointed away from you. And like any other tool that we've covered, you always want to pass it with a thank you. So when passing it out to someone, make sure the blade is faced sideways, you're handing it out, and you will only let go and give it to them once they say, "Thank you, I have the axe." Then you know that they have the axe safely. Now let's get into the proper technique of how to use an axe. So when splitting firewood like this, you want to start off by making sure you have a nice wide stance to make sure you have good balance and don't accidentally slip when swinging the axe. Next, you want to make sure you're holding it right, with one hand at the butt and one hand at the head. And now you're going to be making a big overhead swing to get the wood. And in the process of that, you want to start off behind you, and as you're moving the axe up and down, you want to start sliding your top hand down to move and eventually hit the wood with a lot of power. And when putting that all together, it looks a bit like this. Next, we'll talk about how to care for an axe properly. And something to keep in mind is how to sharpen it. So first, you need an 8 to 10 inch bastard file, which you use much like to how a whetstone is used with a pocket knife. Refer to your stout book for a bit more details on the full sharpening process. Next, in caring for an axe, you want to make sure it stays sheathed almost all of its time. Only take the sheath off when you're about to use it. And finally, for care for an axe, you want to make sure it stays under cover. Thank you for watching this. My name is Ian Korn, and I hope you learned a lot today. And if you have any more questions, feel free to ask your troop guides for more information on axe, knife, and saw safety.